Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're doing something really incredible. We're going to uncover the deep spiritual realities hidden just beneath the surface of what might look like a simple historical map. We're exploring the geographical inheritance of the Promised Land. But listen, we aren't just talking about ancient borders and dusty territories here. We are revealing how this entire process was driven, top to bottom, by God's perfect plan and providence. Literally every mountain, every valley, and every single city distributed was a profound testament to creation, to divine timing, and to the unfolding of a miraculous covenant. To do this, we're going to walk through four pivotal chapters: Joshua chapter 14, 15, 16, and 17. Let's dive right in.
We are starting on an absolute high note of triumphant faith. Check out this bold request from Joshua chapter 14, verse 12. "Give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke in that day." That's Caleb speaking. And you know, he isn't just passively waiting around for a comfortable retirement after years of brutal war. No, he is actively, courageously demanding the very hardest territory. It perfectly frames our entire study today around what active belief in God's promises actually looks like in practice. It's just a stunning declaration of faith.
So, opening up to Joshua chapter 14. Now, what's really fascinating here is the method of distribution. It completely removes human ego from the equation. As we read in Joshua chapter 14, verse 2, the casting of lots eliminates any concept of worldly luck or human favoritism. It clearly showcases that God directly appointed each and every portion. The land wasn't some prize won by the strength of their swords, right? It was a pure, unmerited gift of God's providence.
And speaking of God's providence, this number is absolutely staggering. 45. That's exactly 45 years that Caleb faithfully held on to the promise God made to him through Moses. For nearly half a century, through wilderness wanderings, through fierce, exhausting battles, Caleb never wavered, not once. This brilliantly demonstrates that God's providence is not bound by time. His word is just as true decades later as the very moment it's spoken.
You know, the crucial takeaway here is that Caleb wasn't just eyeing prime real estate. According to Joshua chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, Caleb receives Hebron. Now, the very name Hebron means fellowship or intimacy. So his inheritance was actually a physical manifestation of his profound, lifelong fellowship with God. It's a beautiful reminder for us that our true divine inheritance isn't just about what we receive, but about who we walk with.
Moving right along into Joshua chapter 15.
When we map out God's plan here, stretching from the wilderness of Zin down south all the way to the Mediterranean Sea out west, we see a massive, deliberate geographic footprint for the tribe of Judah. This wasn't just a giant slice of land for the sake of having space, it was the strategic placement of a people who were about to play a central role in human history.
This brilliantly shows us the spiritual why behind all these boundaries. These borders laid the literal groundwork for God's ultimate redemptive plan. Think about it. From this very soil would rise King David, and ultimately, from this exact lineage, the coming Messiah, Jesus Christ. God was literally drawing the map for salvation.
Within this sweeping, grand plan, we also get this beautiful, intimate picture of family faith. Look at how faith passes down generationally in Joshua chapter 15, verses 13 through 19. It moves from Moses down to Caleb, who goes and defeats the giants, and then it immediately takes root in the very next generation. His daughter Aksa boldly steps up and asks for the springs of water. It's a powerful symbol of seeking a generational blessing. Faith is meant to be inherited and acted upon by our children, for sure.
But you know, chapter 15 doesn't end without a pretty sobering reality check. In Joshua chapter 15, verse 63, we read that the Jebusites remained in Jerusalem. Despite all the massive victories we just talked about, this is a stark warning. Incomplete obedience leaves enemy strongholds untouched. It teaches us a tough lesson. While God's promises are absolutely true, stepping into our complete divine inheritance requires absolute, ongoing obedience and total reliance on God's strength.
All right, turning the page to Joshua chapter 16. It is just incredible to watch this unfold. The prophetic blessing that Jacob spoke over Joseph's sons way back in Genesis chapter 48, it becomes a lived, geographic reality right here by divine decree. God places Ephraim and Manasseh right in the central mountains, planting them in a region that would eventually become the very heart of northern Israel. God's word, even spoken generations ago, never fails to hit its mark.
This right here perfectly captures how God's providence operates entirely on His holy terms, not ours. Human tradition heavily dictated that the elder son, Manasseh, should receive the primary blessing. But God elevated Ephraim, the younger brother.
This establishes such a profound biblical truth. God's grace always supersedes human expectations or worldly status. Our inheritance in God's kingdom is based completely on His grace, not our earthly pedigree.
Yet, sadly, just like we saw with Judah earlier, we hit another tragic misstep here in Joshua chapter 16, verse 10. Ephraim failed to drive out the Canaanites in Gezer. This partial obedience deeply compromised their spiritual purity and planted the deadly seeds for future idolatry. It's a really stark warning for believers today, isn't it? It shows the immense dangers of compromising with the world instead of wholly following God's commands.
That brings us to Joshua chapter 17.
I absolutely love the detail we find here in Joshua chapter 17, verses 3 and 4. The daughters of Zelophehad, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, they step forward in a culture that heavily prioritized male inheritance. These faithful women boldly claim the promise made to them through Moses. They remind us so powerfully that God's covenant is accessible to absolutely anyone who boldly steps forward in faith to claim what He has promised. God honors faith, period.
But man, right alongside that incredible faith, we see a glaring human weakness. Joshua chapter 17, verse 13 shows Manasseh putting the Canaanites to forced labor instead of driving them out. They actively chose the economic convenience of free labor over the radical, uncompromising obedience commanded by God. By trying to use the world's systems for their own benefit, they missed out on the fullness and the true security of the Promised Land.
So let's contrast the two worldviews that violently clash at the end of this chapter. The descendants of Joseph come up to Joshua, and they're complaining. From a worldly perspective, they grumble that their land is too narrow, and they are completely paralyzed by the fear of the Canaanites' iron chariots. But the biblical worldview, championed by Joshua, demands trusting providence. It means actively pioneering, working hard, and clearing those mountain forests despite the massive obstacles in front of them.
Well, Joshua absolutely refuses to coddle their complaints. His response in Joshua chapter 17, verse 18, is an electrifying declaration of faith. He tells them to take to the wooded mountains and cut them down. He assures them that when God is with them, no iron chariot, no dense forest, and no giant can stand against divine providence. The provision is there, waiting, but the work of faith is required to actually lay hold of it. So, as we wrap up this explainer looking at the unshakable faith of Caleb, the boldness of Zelophehad's daughters, and Joshua's fiery command, what about you? Where in your own life is God asking you to stop complaining about the iron chariot standing in your way? What dense, intimidating forests do you need to pick up your axe in faith and clear out today so that you can fully claim your divine inheritance? God's promises are waiting, but the step of faith, well, that's yours to take.